So let me turn now to the topic at hand. You know, long before we ever took up the issue of civility, long before, a 16-year-old George Washington recorded what he called the 110 Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. And they spoke of respect and consideration of others. They spoke of kindness, as Robin has just done so eloquently. One rule, for instance, says, do not make fun of anything important to others. Another, number 45, that frog always seems to accompany me when I come here. Number 45 says, when you must give advice or criticism, consider whether it should be given in public or private, and above all, be gentle. Number 89 says, speak not evil of the absent, for it is unjust. And for the fashionistas among us, I have to offer number 54, which says, play not the peacock, looking everywhere about you to see if you be well decked out. And finally, there are three that seem particularly relevant today, given the quality of our public discourse. One is, think before you speak. How novel. Or, let your conversation be without malice, and in all causes of passion, let reason govern. And finally, number 79, be not apt to relate news if you know not the truth thereof. So these words of wisdom from our first president actually long predate him. He got them from a set of rules composed by the French Jesuits in 1595. So we're following a long and noble tradition in attempting to institutionalize and to inculcate in ourselves a pattern of behavior based on common courtesy that makes possible our ability to live together, to work together, to teach and learn together, and to thrive together. It's not a new topic for us either. Certainly not for me. I have been singing the song of civility throughout my tenure here, raising it as a value, as a goal, at every opportunity. And even with so many of you right by my side, it remains a work in progress. So I am thrilled and I am grateful that Robin and the Faculty Senate took it upon themselves to team with Academic Affairs and our Chief Diversity Officer, Ron Milan, and with me, not just to devote today's convocation to civility, but to make it a long-term project. And I'm delighted that the UCE is part of the effort as well. And on February 8th, they are sponsoring a town hall on diversity and inclusion. I'm going to be there, and I hope all of you will be there as well. As part of these efforts, the President's Award for Faculty Excellence will focus this year on civility. The application form that we will put out provides some ideas of what civil behavior might consist of, as well as a list of criteria, but it's really not all-encompassing. So if there's someone that you wish to nominate for reasons that don't appear on the form, please do so. The applications are going to be available shortly, and when they are, I hope we have lots and lots of nominees. Our goal is to bring the concept of civility front and center for the community so that in practice, in our classrooms, in our offices, in our residence halls, and throughout the campus, we all feel that we are being treated with respect. The notion of civility and its companions, diversity and inclusion, is really embedded in our strategic plan, in goals like student-centeredness, and in many, many of our initiatives. But we want civility embedded in the heart and consciousness of every one of us. Every one of our colleagues, even those who are not here this morning, and every one of our students. It should be simple to achieve, but we have seen that it is not. And after all, we live in a world that seems to grow more uncivil, more vulgar and rancorous with every passing day. We started the academic year with the racial malevolence and violence in Charlottesville. Soon after, a crescendo of stories of workplace harassment, bullying, and sexual abuse emerged, dominating the airwaves, the soundtrack, the air that we breathe. Brave women and some men, empowered finally to tell their stories and retrieve the dignity that had literally been stolen from them. The ongoing immigration battle and the ugly rhetoric surrounding it from Washington and elsewhere has really raised the ante all the more. So it's no surprise that every poll imaginable reports that the vast majority of Americans believe that, as a nation, our lack of civility has really reached crisis level. Now, here's the paradox. I would wager that many of those same Americans also perpetuated incivility, being rude or disrespectful or crude or insensitive without even recognizing it in their own behavior. So here at FIT, our student surveys tell us that although there have been many, many improvements, the students continue to feel that sometimes we treat them with disrespect or with indifference. Of course, they treat each other rudely too, and they are sometimes rude to us as well. But let's be honest, we're not always as courteous to each other as we think we are. None of us, myself included, are perfect. But as educational role models, it is really our obligation to attempt to be, to try always to extend to others respect and courtesy, even if we think they don't deserve it. So rule number 65 says, scoff at none, although they give occasion. So last fall, following Charlottesville, I sent a memo to the community emphasizing the importance of everyday civility in our own environment, not just as an ideal, but as an actual individual behavior that is personally owned and acknowledged. You know, Toni Morrison once said at an academic conference, like it or not, we are paradigms of our own values, advertisements of our own ethics. And then she asked her colleagues, how do we treat each other, members of our own profession? How do we respond to professional cunning, to sly self-interest, to raw, ruthless ambition? What are we personally willing to sacrifice for the public good? Tough questions. But if answered honestly, they speak to our personal integrity, to our personal levels of civility. We teach values by having them, she said. I would paraphrase that by saying we teach civility by practicing civility. And we all have a part to play. It is sometimes somewhat comforting to know that the rules of civility date back to ancient times. Human nature is, after all, rather unruly. And like Sisyphus, we are constantly having to push that rock up the hill. But I'm feeling very optimistic, given the initiative of the Faculty Senate, the activities of our Diversity Council, the new and ongoing programs on civility and kindness for students that are sponsored by our Enrollment Management and Student Success Division, and the groundswell of interest so many of you are exhibiting in this important work. For my part, I will continue to be the most enthusiastic cheerleader, to welcome your suggestions and your ideas, and of course to support programs and services that contribute to this effort. So before I turn the podium over to our guest speaker, let me leave you with one more rule from that long list that young Mr. Washington recorded. It is appropriately rule number 1. Every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present. It is with this simple but quite essential rule that I welcome you back. And now I would like to invite Dr. Janie Harden Fritz to the podium. As Jack mentioned, Dr. Fritz is a professor and director of the BA, MA, and PhD programs in the Department of Communication and Rhetorical Studies at Duquesne University. She studies communication in the workplace, exploring how professional civility and incivility affect productivity and relationships at work. She is the author of the prize-winning book, Professional Civility, Communicative Virtue at Work, and co-author of several others. You will also find her work in many scholarly journals. Her most recent studies focus on the intersection of professional civility and leadership practices, and I am just delighted that she's here with us this morning. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Janie.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thanks to all of you here. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this important and necessary initiative. I want to thank Dr. Milan and President Brown for inviting me to speak, and I offer special thanks to Ms. Nina Conroy and Ms. Beverly Solacek for their kind assistance, and to Professor Robin Sacken, President of the Faculty Senate, for her support. I am treasurer of my own Faculty Senate at Duquesne University, and I know the work that goes into it. It's just amazing. The claim that our society has become marked by a growing crisis of incivility seems difficult to dispute. Shelley D. Lane, a communication scholar, in her 2017 book, Why Are They So Rude? Understanding Everyday Incivility, addresses this crisis, noting yearly civility polls, as Dr. Brown mentioned, indicating people's growing belief in this crisis and expectations for it to become worse, and documenting harms resulting from incivility. It's interesting. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never harm me. Not true. My own work on the topic of civility and incivility reveals that within the past 2 decades, maybe longer, but surely the past 2, the number of books and articles about civility and incivility, rudeness and lack of respect, and related issues of bullying and destructive forms of communication has continued to grow, emerging from many disciplines and fields: communication, political science, sociology, education, philosophy, law, management, and leadership studies, to name just a few. And if I've left out your discipline and you deal with that issue, please accept my apologies, because it's everywhere. Everyone is trying to address this issue. The workplace, the political sphere, we'll say no more, educational institutions, no context is free from the strife of incivility. Institutes have emerged to counteract this plague, such as the Johns Hopkins Institute Civility Project. But we've been here before. This moment is not new. Concerns about civility and incivility in the public sphere emerged in 17th century New England, where disputes and disagreements among Protestant religious sects threatened the bond of civil society. The task back then was restoring the broken unity generated by religious disagreements. Although our disagreements today rest with a broader range of issues than, although certainly including those in the religious domain, many of the same general issues and concerns remain today. And so we come to this moment, a context rife with dispute, disagreement, and distress over the rending of our social fabric, bringing to the forefront concerns about human difference across many dimensions that make our educational institutions increasingly contested terrain. Fashion Institute of Technology is leading the way in the State University of New York's New York Systems quest to be a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, touch points that address issues of respecting and valuing difference directly and unequivocally. And I watched your town hall meeting in 2016, and it was wonderful, wonderful. I was very encouraged. FIT is ahead of the curve. You will stay ahead of the curve because you know this quest is an ongoing process rather than a finished accomplishment. And there is always more to learn and room to grow. All institutions of higher education are facing these issues. Norms and expectations for behavior are changing rapidly, and we're all looking for resources to help us accomplish our educational goals in this demanding historical moment, a moment in which content expertise is insufficient for educators seeking to reach a generation of students who have grown up with a different set of norms than they did. Is this true? No, yes, right. I guess it depends on where you're coming in. Maybe some of the instructors here are of that generation, and so you understand. And who hail, students who may have different norms and who hail from a wide range of demographic and identity affiliations. And for students entering a global workforce where getting along with persons not like themselves in multiple ways is no longer an option, but a marketplace imperative. Part of FIT's strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion is to create a civil learning environment. When implemented mindfully and constructively, civility will support and nourish diversity, equity, and inclusion in the institution as a whole and in the classroom. This claim is the focus of my remarks today. I will highlight different ways of understanding civility, offer a framework that may be helpful for approaching civility in the classroom, and conclude with some coordinates for establishing a communicative ethic of pedagogical civility in the classroom. The idea of civil discourse or civility is an ancient and enduring ideal. Some scholars, such as law professor and public intellectual Stephen Carter, point to Erasmus, the 16th century Dutch humanist, and some of those Jesuits. Maybe he was a Jesuit, I don't know. I have to look that up. As one of the first proponents of shared standards for civil conduct, many other writers followed in his footsteps. Even George Washington, as Dr. Brown pointed out, at about maybe a little younger than the age of a traditional college student, weighed in on the issue with his rules of civility and decent behavior in company and conversation. The practice of civility is focused on the pragmatic reality of the human condition. We are fated to live together in some form of community which requires everyone to be attentive to the legitimate concerns and sensibilities of others. Carter defines civility as the sum of the many sacrifices we are called to make for the sake of living together. Educator Robert Connolly, advocating instruction in civility in first-year college classes, defines civility as rooted in the value of living as part of diverse communities, which calls us to serve the common good, not just function out of self-interest. Civility helps us live harmoniously with others. Philosopher Cheshire Calhoun notes that civility fits citizens for life in a pluralistic society and is closely connected to tolerance. The civil citizen exercises tolerance in the face of deep disagreement about the good. And oh, is there deep disagreement about the good today? There is. Respects the rights of others, refrains from violence, intimidation, harassment, and coercion, does not show contempt for others' life plans, and has a healthy respect for others' privacy. Civility involves accommodation and compromise, as well as self-restraint, placing limits on one's speech. Civility is marked not only by things we shouldn't do, it is also an active process that involves listening attentively to others with whom we disagree and trying to understand their positions. That's hard. That's not easy to do. Civility, as President Brown herself noted in 2016, permits us to enrich our own set of expectations by the influence of what others believe and how they live and what is important to them. It's about respect. In the academic world today, civility is a contested term. For some, it speaks of class distinctions, the hegemonic control and disenfranchisement of those with less power by those with more through control of acceptable style and content of communication, or just as problematic, unreflective obedience to community norms that eclipses concerns for participatory justice. For others, it speaks of an aversion to controversial topics that might provoke the unpleasantness and discomfort of disagreement, which, of course, if we followed that in this day and age, it would mean pretty much not to talk at all. And we're not willing, I think, to do that. It's an equal opportunity gag rule, that position. For those who follow the 17th century model of Roger Williams, founder of Rhode Island and advocate of religious freedom, however, civility speaks of a raw, confrontational, passionate advocacy of ideas in the public square with the aim of persuading others, while permitting or even encouraging those with different opinions to do the same. The picture here is a free-for-all, an agonistic public sphere with everyone shouting at once, or maybe taking turns at persuading others to a particular point of view. Everyone must talk, and talk a lot. Now, in the context of education, the first three approaches might not be very helpful. Okay. In an academic environment designed to promote learning, the first three understandings of civility as hegemonic class control, unreflective adherence to norms, or a studied avoidance of disagreement, those don't work very well. First, any cooperative endeavor requires some rules governing discourse and interaction. In the group communication literature, they talk about having something like reflective thinking or nominal group technique because the goal is to control interaction losses. If students get together to study for a test, sometimes what happens? They don't end up studying. They end up doing other things. Maybe they do study, but interaction losses happen. So you've got to have some way to structure the interaction. Even if class-related etiquette and manners have been used as a tool of exclusion, every culture cultivates practices of politeness. This is Brown and Levinson, for those of you who study linguistics. Concern for others' autonomy and dignity and their need for connection to other human beings, aimed at coordinating common life together with at least some degree of social harmony. Furthermore, okay, that framing of civility, I'm not there yet, got ahead of myself. That framing of civility isn't civility at all in the best sense of the term. Connolly agrees. Civil behavior, as reduced to oblivious obedience to community norms, has been evoked as one way that has been used in the past and still today by those in power to control and keep others in their place of subservience. In such situations, authentic civility, informed by integrity, may necessitate civil disobedience that challenges the powers that be. Those are his words. True civility speaks truth to power and contains within it the possibility for responsive change and development of norms, and we have seen that in our country. We need to see more. To the third point, avoiding disagreement altogether stops the heart of education. The very point of critical thinking, for instance, which educators promote as a key cognitive skill, requires questioning, raising points of difference and disagreements, and testing ideas for their soundness, offering alternative points of view that might provide maybe better or improved ways of approaching a problem or a question. But how far toward the other side, a vision of civility as vigorous disagreement and dispute, should we go in the classroom? And there's going to be disagreements about that too, I think. For some, the explicit direct clash of opposing views doesn't seem to promote learning. It looks more like a competitive debate with winning the argument as the primary, indeed the sole purpose of interaction. And I will say, I was a debater in high school, and I watched our debate team at Duquesne. We had a style of debate one time that scared small children and made them cry because it was so rapid fire. And then we turned to the National Educational Debate Association, where you bring in judges, part of the community, and people have to speak in a way that can be understood. It's not just this rapid fire crazy thing. Again, not to say that the other styles of debate are not good. They have their purposes and places, and they're very useful. So winning is the primary, indeed the sole purpose of interaction. We listen, yes, but only in order to attack others' positions and tear them down. This approach to civility seems to be a thinly disguised version of the behavior civility was designed to avoid: contemptuous language, insults, degrading comments, and other types of disrespect, and may even risk reverting to the nasty, brutish, and short Hobbesian war of all against all. A dialogue marked by thoughtful consideration of other standpoints and principled articulation of one's own seems more inviting, maybe. And many suggest that in this historical moment, dialogue may be just what is needed in order to keep the focus of attention on learning. For those taking this perspective, contentious debate in the classroom seems too focused on the critical in critical thinking, whereas methods such as dialogue or appreciative inquiry, which I know is really an approach about organizational experience where you look at the positives and the good things rather than focusing on the drawbacks or the negatives, but I think it can be applied as one of those transferable concepts. So approaches such as dialogue or appreciative inquiry move toward a constructive understanding of difference, seeking to learn from otherness, identifying implications of ideas, and finding potential common ground as well as differences. The issue is focus of attention. What are we attending to? One key for education today may be akin to what Arnett and Arneson propose as dialogic civility, an approach to civil discourse that recognizes differences and seeks to learn from the ideas of others. The work my colleagues Ronald C. Arnett and Leanne Bell and I have done on communication ethics literacy recognizes that we live in a world of narrative and virtue contention. We don't live in the same stories, and what we consider virtues and the good doesn't claim agreement. We don't agree on what is good for human life and conduct, yet we must work together as a human community to forge ways of accomplishing life together. Such a goal requires learning about and from difference with the hope that some common ground may emerge. So we've got two kinds of learning I'll talk about: content learning and then learning about others. Admittedly, it can be very hard, though, to find even minimal common ground, a shared place where we can stand together in agreement once we have sorted through our differences. And those differences matter, and those differences are good and helpful. Sometimes they feel incommensurable. You just can't get to an agreement, but usually you can find some minimal common ground by reframing positions, maybe making a bigger pie. We talk about sharing the pie. How many pieces? Can we make it bigger? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. Okay. In the classroom, the common ground is learning. The common ground is learning, acquiring knowledge about a content area or a subject, or gaining applied knowledge of a professional practice. The common ground or common center of learning, I propose, is the focal point for a civility in the classroom that offers protection for diversity of ideas and identities, seeks to establish equity among participants sharing the goal of learning, and promotes inclusion of differences, not just toleration. It is this mode of civility that encourages learning about and appreciating others' differences, along with learning content and skills. Think with me as I develop this idea further through a well-known metaphor. I had not heard this metaphor until maybe a month ago. You probably all know it very well. It's the dance metaphor. Anybody heard this dance metaphor? When I say it, you may recognize it. Okay. One popular rendering of the relation of diversity and inclusion is that diversity is being invited to the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance. But I suggest that we extend this metaphor. Inclusion is making sure all attendees know how to do the dance. But even that is not enough. Is everyone able equally to contribute their moves to the dance as a whole? What new dances might be possible when diverse routines become part of the pattern? And might everyone learn and practice a few key moves for common routines and also have space to do their own dances? And note, very important, this dance needs to be accessible to those whose movements are assisted by technologies of various types. There is more than one way to dance. And we want to make that happen. Thank you. Thank you. Now, this metaphor must be applied loosely. what I've just described speaks of personal, social, intellectual, and group identity differences that enrich the human condition. Furthermore, this model of civility does not apply an abnegation of authority by instructors. I'm not advocating the classroom as a therapy session. You have good places for students to get help, and that's a good thing. The metaphor does speak of how the give and take of learning in the classroom might progress in ways that honor all participants within the horizon of the educational purposes of the learning environment, and that varies. There's always a space within which certain kinds of learning will take place. Some are more specific and narrow, some are broader. Okay. Instructors are respected because they have something valuable to teach that the students hope to learn. And it is the responsibility of the instructor to set the tone and establish the conditions under which the task of learning can be accomplished. The larger institutional mission sets the general or global parameters for all units of the university, which, and then that applies to all classes, generally speaking, but within those parameters is a great deal of leeway for faculty members to adapt to the needs of a particular set of students. If a key pillar in an institution's mission is civility, as it is with FIT, then support is present for encouraging civility in the learning process. But how can that be done? I return to Connolly's work on establishing a culture of civility in the first-year classroom. He cites Stephen Carter's emphasis on civility as a way of caring for the community, and notes how a focus on civility can help students understand why there are guidelines for classroom conduct. The classroom is a community. In Connolly's words, living well in community is part of what academic learning is all about, and learning more generally. The rules of a syllabus governing a classroom, such as not cheating, guidelines for electronic devices, attendance policies, policies against harassment and supporting those with disabilities, stem not from arbitrary authority, but from a well thought out and considered reflection on experience and the professional narrative that we as instructors inhabit. They guide interaction toward the larger goal of learning. Expectations for civility in the classroom help explain why those rules are put in place. They are to protect the learning community, and they're everyone's business, they're everyone's responsibility. These expectations are a gift. They're a gift that we offer to our students that is of equal importance to content knowledge. Civility in the classroom is the necessary relational accompaniment to the informational dimension of education. Setting expectations from the start can, again, in Connolly's words, set the right tone for introducing students to the culture of the community they are about to enter and alert them to the basic expectations of the community. Setting expectations frames the environment within which education will take place. Pedagogical civility, an offshoot of Arnett's dialogic education as conversation about ideas and between people, and my own work on professional civility as communicative virtue, is one way to approach expectations for civil discourse in the classroom. What does pedagogical civility look like? That's what we want to know. How do we do this? What do we say? How do we enact it? How do we make it part of who we are? If social civility, for example, respecting others' privacy, offering help when needed, refraining from pointing out others' flaws publicly, and many of the good examples that George Washington offered, if those demonstrate respect for the comfort and dignity of others in our shared social world, and if political civility, such as demonstrating tolerance, voting on the basis of the common good instead of self-interest, and refraining from violence, if those types of civilities, social and political, help us accomplish the shared goal of living together as a self-governing community, then civility in the world of education, civil discourse practices in the classroom, or pedagogical civility helps us accomplish the shared goals of education. Learning, I keep coming back to that point, the shared goal, the purpose is learning. Pedagogical civility will manifest itself in different forms because there are differences in instructors. There are differences in classes, and sometimes, isn't it true, you don't know what the class is like until you get into it. The people are different every semester, every 2 sections of the same class. You can't treat them all alike. And one of the things, one of the French teachers with whom I had the privilege of studying said something that has stuck with me forever. She said, "I do not teach the syllabus, I teach the students." So I thought, yay! I go, yes. Shout out for her. So it's going to be different. There's no one right way to do it. Some classrooms, for example, might look more like the vigorous public square of Roger Williams than a dialogic moment of encounter. Some classes can take that, and some instructors are comfortable with that, and some are not. But every classroom will adhere to some agreed upon practices, some minimal agreement that provides safe spaces for all participants. It is also important to note that civility is not devoid of emotion or passion. Reason has to rule, but there is a passion if you care about something. Philosopher of education Megan Laverty notes that civility involves people together engaging each other adaptively and responsively, and that the purpose of civility is not to hide our feelings or to feign respect. Civility enables individuals to communicate a range of feelings from sympathy and gratitude to impatience and frustration in a manner that is sensitive to the dignity of all. And that's where reason comes in. Something has to guide. Earlier I mentioned the dance metaphor. There's a second metaphor that offers additional insights and speaks to the issue of how faculty members can model pedagogical civility for students. Consider the classroom as a craft workshop, a metaphor drawn from the work of Richard Sennett. He's a sociologist. I think he's a public intellectual, but I mean, it's still good to think about disciplines, even though we have interdisciplinarity. So I will list him as a sociologist. Where expert craft practitioners invite learners into a tradition of practice governed by standards of excellence that require attentiveness to instruction, efforts to get it right, correction, and continued diligence, with the hope that these students will develop expertise within, here's another horizon, a horizon of excellence that permits variations that extend the scope of excellence of the craft, but that still bear the mark of the tradition of practice. I went to your FIT museum last night and saw the display about changes in fashion over the centuries. And just to focus on one part of it, fashion shifts, it changes, and people enter that tradition and make it excellent in different ways, but there's always still something that guides and goes underneath and leads that tradition. This method of learning is a time-honored approach to the applied arts and professional practice. Now, in the world of ideas inhabited by the liberal arts, those professional practices include critical thinking, openness to others' points of view, reasoned argument, and passion that pushes the learner forward with enough energy to care about the task of acquiring knowledge and wisdom. Sometimes that's a challenge, isn't it? In the classroom, we want people to learn, and sometimes they don't want to learn what we want to teach them, but we try to find ways to make it happen the best we can. Civility in the Craft Workshop invites all to participate around the shared goal of learning the craft. FIT is in the admirable position of attending to both the world of ideas and the world of professional practice, and you do it very, very well. As I understand, you're like ranked number 1, number 2, back and forth with whoever it may be. Very impressive. Everyone can model pedagogical civility within the metaphor of the craft workshop. Now, I may take a risk with this section here, so bear with me. One of the tasks faculty members must engage is offering evaluation of student work. Isn't that your favorite thing to do? If it's good work, it's easy. You just say, why was it so good? But what if it needs help? How do you do that? Evaluation is an expert's rendering of judgment that is received as important guiding information by the apprentice. Evaluation is offered in the hope of encouraging improvement by the apprentice, and comes from the heart of an instructor blessed with what Sennett describes as sociable expertise. Sociable expertise. A desire to help others learn and to pass on the craft, recognizing that an apprentice will adopt the standards of the craft and with experience will add a unique contribution to the ongoing tradition. Evaluation is a task of pedagogical civility, a response to efforts, sometimes better, sometimes worse, of the apprentice craft learner, praising work done well, pointing to places for improvement, and heeding the adage in the words of my horseback riding instructor, Barbara DeWorkin, notice everything, overlook much, change a little. Notice everything, overlook much, change a little. Now, this pedagogically civil approach to evaluation is quite different from the uncivil response of humiliation, shaming a student for less than perfect efforts, which discourages the inclination to strive to reach beyond the current skill level or to test alternatives to what has been done before. An impulse toward humiliation is the bitter residue of the antisocial expert who anchors excellence in the self rather than in the standards of the craft and rejects the budding development of an apprentice because the work is not done the way the teacher would do it. In craft work, the standards don't rest within the self independently and autonomously, but with the group, indeed within the craft itself, which was given definition through the tradition of craft by the profession itself. Now, the expert does embody those standards, and many of you do embody those standards, and my guess is that we don't really have any folk in here who do that kind of, uncivil, antisocial expertise, so I don't know who I'm talking to, but if you see anybody that does it, you can say, yeah, watch the film, watch the video, right? The expert embodies the standards and enacts them, teaching apprentices to become bearers of this tradition in their turn, generation to generation, with the expectation that the tradition will grow and develop through contributions of new craft practitioners. And I must say, there have been some times, not many, when I have said things to students that I wish I hadn't said, and it just came out. And I apologize and try to make it right if I can. And students sometimes are quite forgiving, thank goodness. Okay, so guidelines for professional or pedagogical civility in the classroom. This is the middle part of my talk, but it's short. It's short, a short middle part, and then there's a small conclusion. Although there are no fixed rules for pedagogical civility or civil discourse in the classroom, there are some guiding principles that point the way for more specific practices, and I believe you're going to have some of those or have some of those online for this civility campaign that will be ongoing. So I believe you will be in good hands. And there are many, many resources available that get down to the level of the particular. For example, what is a microaggression? What are some examples of microaggressions? And what might an instructor say in the classroom if an inappropriate comment emerges? What are some exercises that will help students learn and practice civil discourse in conversation with each other, and not only in the classroom, but outside, everywhere? Here are some pragmatic guidelines that might be useful as a starting point. So, I guess I should stay over here. Yes, I decided I usually walk around. I'm running from place to place. I just get more energy. The students get exhausted. But I had made this talk. I crafted it, and I wanted to give every little word of it. So I think I'll just stay here and talk as I finish. Okay, that's all right. So set ground rules for discussion on the first day of class. And the ground rules will vary depending on the topic. Some classes really might not provoke or promote or encourage controversial discussions. I teach intercultural communication, and sometimes there are some, pretty potentially, you wouldn't think they'd be controversial issues, but they can be. Some classes then will address potentially challenging topics more than others. Classes covering issues likely to be controversial will provide enhanced opportunities for discussion. And I would tell you the story that I experienced back in, I think it was 1995, when a student came back from the Million Man March. And I was so excited to hear him speak, and he spoke to the class and told about the march, and it was great until he came to a point where he was saying something that Louis Farrakhan had said about another group of persons. And it was not very kind or friendly. And then he said, and when you think about it, he's right. And I went, what am I going to do? So I thought, save the moment. So students, of course, raised their hands, and I guided the interaction, and we talked, and I said, okay, bonus extra credit. Write down what you thought about this event today. Write down what you thought about the discussion. Come in, bring it in. You're going to get extra credit, and I'm going to get you some pizza to eat. I was proud of my students. one of the things they said two things that stuck with me. One of them said, "Oh my goodness, I feel like I'm in a college classroom. Finally, we're talking about important issues." I went, "Oh, that's nice." Another student said to me, "You should never have let him stay in front of the class. Have him sit down because that's a place of authority." And I thought, wow, insightful. I could have had many people take turns getting up and standing in front, but I think, yeah, okay, sit down now, let's have the talk. Just a little example here. And I did not have ground rules for the class, but I worked with the implicit rules. Okay. Another reason why we want to have shared ground rules is that even when people aren't trying to be uncivil, they can be uncivil unknowingly. We can be uncivil to each other because we're following the rules that we think are appropriate for civility. Deborah Tannen, the sociolinguist, you may have read her work, talks about how there are, I know there's more than 2 types of people in the world, but for her there are 2 types of people in the world. One is the type that when you're in conversation with each other, you're supposed to take turns, right? Yeah. How do you know when it's your turn? Well, some people are taught it's your turn when the other person stops talking. But for some people, you know, I know if you want to say something, I know you're going to break in, and then I'll know to stop talking. Can you imagine? Here I am talking on, and I'm beginning to get a little tired, wondering why my conversational partner isn't helping carry the ball, and of course, she's over there going, "When are you going to take a breath so I can say something? You're hogging the conversation." So a mismatched set of expectations. No rancor, no evil intent. It just happens. So it's helpful to say, this is what we're going to do. Where do the ground rules come from? Some say, let your students invent them. And that can actually work. You can say to the students, here's the board, here are the markers, write for us what you think you would like to experience as a civil classroom. Now sometimes, you know, they may be at odds with each other, but that's one way to do it. The students set the rules, the students obey the rules. But others would say, no, you know, I think I know what I need to have students say and do, and so they put it in the syllabus. See? They put it in the syllabus or in some other public place. So you have to decide. Offer explicit definitions and examples of acceptable and unacceptable practices. If indeed we disagree on what acceptable practices are, it's helpful to be able to define them. But you can't list them all. I mean, how do you make a list of everything you shouldn't say or everything you should say? It's not possible. It's like a job description. How do you list it all? It doesn't seem possible. But you can give examples. You can. For example, okay, maybe an explicit statement in the syllabus about safe conversational spaces, definitions of microaggressions, prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping. Practice supportive wording of questions, challenges, and expressions of disagreement. There is a way to express a disagreement or a concern or offer a challenge in a way that stays reasonable. Critical thinking means to ask questions about positions. How do you ask a question in a civil but challenging manner? Practice wording questions and concerns in a way that avoids provoking defensiveness. Instead of, how can you think that? Or what an ignorant comment, which is of course what we're thinking when we hear it, we might consider asking, tell me more about how you came to hold that view. And of course, I mean, sometimes you hear things that are so off the track, you think, I'm not sure I want to know how you came to hold that view, but you can at least inquire, and maybe some learning will happen. Meta-communication. Talk about talk. These rules, in some ways, are meta-communicative utterances or rules. They're saying, talking about talk, how do we govern our discourse? But that's also very helpful in the day-to-day give and take of classroom conversation. If a student offers a hurtful or problematic remark, you could shift the focus to the remark and use it as a learning opportunity. Maybe you repeat what you think you heard. Now, if what you think you heard was what you heard and you repeat it, the student may hear it and go, no, that's not what I said. And then you can say, I'm so glad, because if that's what you had said, that would be problematic for these reasons. Or how do you think that might be problematic? You could repeat what you just heard, ask if you heard the comment correctly, or you could ask a question. How do you think that comment might make immigrants feel? Or if it's a violation of ground rules for discussion, do you see how that remark violates our classroom compact? And there are probably many other ways too. Sometimes students themselves will help each other understand when is a violation occurring, but it may be necessary to talk to a student one-on-one with another person present in order to make expectations clear. Develop discernment and tact. Communicating with civility doesn't mean agreeing with every position, but it might mean exercising tact. Tact means you don't have to say everything that could be said. And it might be that you want to wait till another time or do it privately. Gadamer talks about how tact is walking around something. You're walking around it, not tripping over it. Encourage student leadership. Instructors are leaders in the classroom, but students will be and should be too. Encourage microbursts of leadership in pedagogical civility from students. Seek student feedback. Where's my student feedback one? I don't know where that went. Okay, yeah, okay, I think I was going to add that to that one. That's there. You can't see it, but it's there. Seek feedback. Let's say a difficult conversation emerges. That's what I did in the moment that I experienced. I sought student feedback. How was it handled? Bless you. How was it handled? Was it handled well? What could I have done differently? Again, if you're comfortable. Consider conflicts as learning opportunities. All right, I won't say any more about that. Welcome mistakes. There's something called neurotic guilt where you're looking over your shoulder. Oh, did I do something wrong? Oh no, you're just sure you did something wrong. There is authentic guilt when you did something you really shouldn't have done and somebody points it out and says, you got to fix that. And you go, okay, done. But it's not neurotic guilt. Encourage mistakes. Well, mistakes are going to happen anyway. You don't have to do them deliberately, but you can welcome them. And we're going to say the wrong thing sometimes. Create a climate of forgiveness, admitting mistakes, and moving on. And now, if I can make it through this last part without crying, I will. We live in an imperfect world. We can't fix all that's wrong with it. And it is clear that often we don't even agree on what exactly is wrong or the relative ranking of the various wrongs that face us. But there is much right about this world. A lot of it's happening right here with your institution. And we've come a long way. The very fact that issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion are in the spotlight is an indicator that difference matters, as Arnett and Arneson note in their work on dialogic civility. And I echo, we walk a narrow ridge between cynicism and hope. Human beings are capable of much that is ugly and evil, but we're also capable of so much that is beautiful and good. Pedagogical civility encourages us to ask how we, with our students, in everyday interactions with each other in the classroom, might imagine and together construct a future where the good eclipses the evil and heals what is broken in our human condition. Thank you so much.